We have some very, very interesting information that is coming out of the Las Vegas Raiders OTAs. Rookie guard Caleb Rogers is officially starting to take snaps with the first team unit. And I want to talk about what this means for the Raiders as we kind of go forward. Plus, there's a lot of other information that has come out. I spoke to the guy that I know at the Raiders OTAs yesterday evening, and he gave me some insight into some of what he's kind of noticed from a scheme perspective, especially with the defense, which we will talk about a little bit later on. But let's start right away talking a little bit about Caleb Rogers and kind of what we're hearing, right? So the guy that I spoke to told me that, early on in the process, there was no rotation with Alex Kappa. He was basically locked in as the number one guard. The Raiders decided, hey, we're going to put in guys like Caleb Rogers, Charles Grant. We're going to run them with the second and third team units. And for the most part, up until literally just now, Alex Kappa was basically your starting right guard. Now, obviously, I understand there's a huge, you got training camp, you got preseason, you got pretty much the entire season for things to kind of change. And I know we're so early on in the process. But the fact to me that Caleb Rogers is already rotating in with Alex Kappa with the first team unit is very, very good news, right? Because we already knew that the left guard position was kind of up in the air. Dylan Parham, Jordan Meredith were already kind of battling it out for the left guard position. The left tackle, the center, the right tackle right now is set in stone. There's no rotation among those three guys, right? So if the season started next week, left tackle Colt Miller, center Jackson Powers Johnson, and right tackle DJ Glaze. Right, that would be the unit that would essentially start for the Raiders. And then, of course, the left guard position was the one that we weren't 100% sure with. Dylan Parham, Jordan Meredith were switching. Right, one guy runs 5 snaps, the next guy comes in, runs 5 snaps. Keep in mind, that's with the first team unit. And then, of course, up until just recently, Alex Kappa was also, he was also only the main guy at right guard, right? But that has now flipped, right? So Caleb Rogers is rotating in with Alex Kappa. He is taking those first team snaps. And I'll be honest, guys, I did not think Caleb Rogers would have that look this early on, but I'm actually not surprised because we've heard multiple of our rookie players are getting looks with the first team unit. And I understand some people are going to say, hey, maybe it's just to try to get them, the speed of the game. Maybe it's just to get them to adjust quicker. And that is true. But, let's also be honest. You don't want to throw guys in there too quickly or too early because it could hurt their confidence and they may never recover from that. Right? We know this has happened in the past with certain guys where, maybe the game's just a little bit too fast. Maybe they're thrown in there too quickly and then they ultimately end up just struggling. But with Caleb Rogers, it seems like he's able to kind of handle that, right? He's able to get out there and work with the first team unit. Now, another thing to note is, these guys aren't hitting. They don't have pads on. They're not going full speed, and at least hitting each other, right? They are running full speed, right? The ball gets snapped. These guys are running to get to their spot. But obviously Caleb Rogers has picked up the offense enough. The steps, the angles, he's done enough of a good job that the Raiders will want to at least try him in with the first team unit. And again, this tells me that when the actual preseason comes around, training camp, this tells me that the Raiders are realistically looking at Caleb Rogers as a right guard for the Raiders. And I think this is the most natural spot for him. We have seen him actually take snaps at left guard as well, right? He was on video, I believe, running with the second string offense at left guard. And I think that could also be because of the fact that Dylan Parham and Jordan Meredith are taking snaps with the first team unit. So when the second group comes in, maybe they just need someone to fill that spot, right? Who knows? But to me, I love the fact that we're starting to get this with Caleb Rogers. Now, another thing to keep in mind is at what point will Charles Grant actually be a guy that, hey, he needs to get out there and potentially compete now at right tackle, right? At what point will he start taking first team snaps as well? Will that happen in the offseason? At any point, right? OTAs, I think it's like 1 or 2 weeks left of OTAs. Will it happen potentially during training camp? Like, will Charles Grant get a realistic look at right tackle? Yesterday I posted that Malcolm Koonce was one of the guys that I'm most excited to watch. Thinking about that again, I'm not going to lie to you guys. Charles Grant is the guy that I'm probably most excited to watch going into this season. I'm always a little bit higher on offensive linemen than the general person out there. Dalton Wagner was a guy I really, really wanted to watch last year, and we watched him for one game, and I realized real quickly this guy's not that good, right? Or at least he didn't really develop, but we'll see what he develops into this year. But Charles Grant's the guy, and I'm excited to see what this guy can develop into, and I'm excited to see where he ends up lining up and playing. Um, the Raiders are in a spot where, in 4 years, if the Raiders have a top 5 offensive line, it's going to be made up of 5 guys that are currently on this offensive line right now, right? Or guys that are on the roster right now, right? If the Raiders have an elite offensive line down the line, we already have those guys on the roster. It's just all about developing at this point, right? So we'll see what ends up happening. I do also want to talk a little bit about something that I heard with the Raiders, and I've not heard, but this is something a guy that I talked to at training camp. This is something that he actually observed being at the practice yesterday. He told me, and I had actually asked him to really look into which guys are starting. Asked him to look at which guys are specifically in the secondary rotating in, what type of, dime, or, are they running a cover 3 look? Like, just kind of keeping all that in mind. What are the Raiders kind of doing out there? And, outside of base defense, anytime the Raiders do play nickel, they're not actually using a slot cornerback. Instead, they're going heavy and they're utilizing the big nickel package, which is basically putting a safety down into that slot position. This guy told me that Isaiah Pola-Mao as well as Jeremy Chin right now are the 2 guys that are supposed to start. And anytime they get into this big nickel, Isaiah Pola-Mao ends up coming down and plays that slot corner position. And then on the opposite side of him, it's Jeremy Chin. So what's happening right now is essentially the Raiders, when they get into that nickel defense, and it could change, right? It could absolutely change. But right now, what it looks like is Isaiah Pola-Mao's coming down into the slot. If it's not Isaiah Pola-Mao, Lonnie Johnson Jr. has also been taking snaps at the slot position. And I'm not sure if Lonnie Johnson is a corner or if he's a safety. He kind of played both positions last year. I'm going to be honest. I think there's a real chance that the Raiders will figure out which guy's going to play slot between those 2 guys. Is it Isaiah Pola-Mao? Is it Lonnie Johnson? But I'm pretty sure it's going to end up being Johnson, who's going to end up being our starting slot corner essentially this year, right? So anytime the Raiders get into nickel packages, I think it'll be Lonnie Johnson. Although I wouldn't be surprised if it's Isaiah Pola-Mao, and that's assuming someone else ends up starting at free safety, right? I'm not 100% sold on Isaiah Pola-Mao as a starting free safety, but that is what some people are saying he's supposed to be right now for the Raiders. I think it was the Athletic guys, to Sean Reed specifically of the Athletic. I believe it was him that said something to the tune of Isaiah Pola-Mao's the starting free safety, right? And when I asked this guy, hey, look at exactly who's playing where and what guys are kind of lined up, it's hard for him to know who's the strong safety, who's the free safety, depending on the lineman. He can't really put that together, right? To him, it all kind of just looks the same. But he did tell me which guys are out there when they're running certain defenses or when their first team unit kind of goes out there. And it is also kind of interesting because, let's just say Lonnie Johnson starts at the slot corner position. Right now, the 2 starting corners for the Raiders are Darian Porter and Eric Stokes. So if you guys think about that, Ja'Cory Bennett has literally been downgraded to being a second string corner. I find that kind of crazy that that's where we're at right now, but he's no longer starting for the Raiders. And again, I just find it crazy that this is where we're at because Ja'Cory Bennett showed so much potential and upside last year. And he looked really, really, really good for the Raiders. And I truly thought going into year 3, this guy would actually be able to put it together and be a successful corner in the NFL, right? But it looks like the Raiders are going more so with the bigger guys, right? Eric Stokes, Darian Porter. They're getting the first team snaps right now. And the only time Ja'Cory Bennett is really getting out there is when that second team unit comes in, right? When the second team linebackers come in, right? The Tommy Eichenbergs. When the second string defensive linemen come in, right? Tyree Wilson, for example. Although I think Tyree Wilson's technically starting right now. But, it's going to be interesting, right? To really see where this Raiders secondary kind of ends up as we kind of continue to go forward. Another guy that's been getting a little bit of hype is there's 2 guys specifically, but safeties, Trey Taylor, as well as safety Thomas Harper, right? Both guys are getting a little bit of hype at the moment. Both guys have taken first team snaps at the free safety position. And that's interesting as well because, Trey Taylor was, he got that award for being the best safety in college. And I know the awards don't generally mean anything, but he was really, really, really good in college. And, I almost feel like Trey Taylor, for example, is built to be in that cover 3 system, right, as a free safety. Trey Taylor's not a guy that's going to play in the box. He's a guy that's going to run sideline to sideline, right? He's fast, he's quick, he's a cover 3 type of guy, right? And the Raiders are kind of getting into that system, so I would not be surprised if either Thomas Harper or Trey Taylor end up starting for the Raiders at free safety. In fact, I have a feeling, right? And again, it's just a prediction, right? Or this is a guess, I should say, right? I have a feeling one of those two guys will end up starting at free safety. And I think there's a real chance that Isaiah Pola-Mao plays more of like the strong safety, or slot position, right? And with Jeremy Chin also playing as a strong safety on the other side or a slot. And then even linebackers sometimes, right? I can see the Raiders just going in with one linebacker and having both Pola-Mao and Chin down in the box. I think the Raiders realize that, hey, we don't have like a true free safety right now. And they got to try figuring out which guy can actually play that position. And I'm not saying Isaiah Pola-Mao is a bad football player, right? And I do hope people understand what I say when I talk about Isaiah Pola-Mao. When you have a free safety, a guy playing in the middle of the field, that guy has to be explosive and he has to change direction really, really, really quickly, right? His hips have to be very fluid because sometimes you'll be backpedaling left and then you got to flip your hips and run to the right and you got to go find that football in the air. And Isaiah Pola-Mao is not the fastest safety, right? He's a good safety. He can play down in the box. He's physical. He can take on offensive linemen. But his game, I think, is more so down in the box, not out trying to cover people, right? So we'll see how things kind of go as we go forward. But I do think the Raiders secondary will shape up to be a good unit. But do keep in mind, this year's guys are going to be a lot different than what we kind of saw last year. Right? Not only have we lost a couple of our players, but just generally speaking, like, we didn't really see Thomas Harper last year. We didn't have Jeremy Chin. Even Pola-Mao didn't play a whole lot early on, right? He became that starter, a little bit later on. And, even guys like Lonnie Johnson, like, he might play like 800 snaps for the Raiders this year. We'll see what ends up happening, right? Either way, I am excited for the Raiders and kind of the way things are trending. I think our defense will be a lot better. I want to talk about two final things that were said by Chip Kelly. Really not a huge deal, but one of those I think is a little bit of a bigger deal, which is Chip Kelly basically talked a little bit about Michael Mayer and the fact that there were trade rumors with Michael Mayer. And this actually was something that Chip Kelly said yesterday in his presser. If you guys have not checked that out, go check it out. It's a little bit on the longer side with Chip Kelly specifically. But, Chip Kelly to me is a very, very smart coach. You can see this guy has a good football mind. You can see it with Chip Kelly that he knows what he's talking about. And he basically backed up Michael Mayer a little bit. And I'm actually very happy to kind of see this. So Chip Kelly said, I think Michael Mayer has been fantastic since I've been here. We didn't make any decisions on anything until you see him here. And Mike's been fantastic since day one of the offseason program. So Chip Kelly's basically talking about the fact that the Raiders were, quote unquote, willing to trade Michael Mayer, right? That was a report that I believe the Athletic guys put out, right? Sean Reed, Vic Tafer, I think those two guys kind of put it out there that Michael Mayer was a guy that the Raiders were looking to shop, right, or looking to trade potentially. I think they also mentioned Zamir White being another guy the Raiders were looking to trade. But then Chip Kelly also went on to say, there's never a position anywhere where coaches say we have too many good players. He said, I checked. You can play 2 tight ends in a game at the same time, and sometimes you can play 3 tight ends, Kelly added. I love that Chip Kelly is saying this about Michael Mayer, right? He's basically committing to Michael Mayer. He's basically putting it out there that we will roll forward with Michael Mayer, and we will basically keep 2 tight ends out there, 3 tight ends out there to utilize this guy. And, I'm going to also just kind of throw this out there. I think there's a real chance that Michael Mayer this year could develop into like a top 10 run blocking, top 10 pass blocking tight end. And I know that's not why the Raiders drafted him, right? 2nd round. That too, we traded up, right? He was like the 33rd or 34th overall pick. So he's a very, very, very highly drafted player, right? But when the Raiders drafted him, and I know it was kind of high, and we have these expectations that he'll be like 1,100 yards a season. The thing is, if he still develops into an elite run blocker, an elite pass blocker, and he can still have 400, 500, 600 yards, and he can still beat linebackers, he can out jump guys, right? He's pretty big. that's still a good productive football player. And at the end of the day, you need different roles out there, right? You need guys like Brock Bowers that can line up in the slot and beat any corner, safety, or linebacker. But then you need Michael Mayer, who could be an elite run blocker potentially as a tight end, right? There are different roles essentially that you have these guys kind of playing. And, I think what Chip Kelly is saying is that we can utilize both of these guys, right? We don't have to trade Michael Mayer. And truth be told, this guy's value is probably not even that high, right? I think for the Raiders, you're better off keeping Michael Mayer for the next 2 years to see what this guy has than trading him for like a 5th round pick, right? I think the Raiders can continue to utilize Michael Mayer. There's probably not a lot of number 2 tight ends in the NFL that are better than Michael Mayer. He might be the best in the NFL, right? And I do hope the Raiders keep him around. I do hope they don't end up trading him. I think it's possible they can still trade him. I just don't see it actually happening. I think the Raiders value having good players, as Chip Kelly's saying, right? No one said that it's like illegal to have 2 good players, right? So Chip Kelly said that, and he also said one other thing, and again, it's not a huge deal, but I did want to just report it to you guys so you guys have all the facts. Chip Kelly talked a little bit about the fact that it was Raiders running back coach who told Ashton Jeanty to change his stance. So it actually was not Chip Kelly. If you guys remember, Ashton Jeanty went on and did like that interview where he said that, hey, I spoke to Chip Kelly and this is kind of what he said about changing my stance. And with that, everybody just assumed it was Chip Kelly that was kind of forcing Ashton Jeanty to change that stance. But Ashton Jeanty confirmed that, Chip Kelly confirmed that, hey, it was not my decision. Yes, I gave him that basketball example, which was true that Ashton Jeanty was saying. But really, it was the Raiders running backs coach, Dylan McCowell, who was the actual guy that wanted Ashton Jeanty to change that stance. And again, I agree with it. I think it makes sense. Dylan's also a very, very well-respected running backs coach as well. This guy knows what he's doing. I think it is smart for Ashton Jeanty to change that stance now. I think he's way too high trying to stand up. I think you lose explosiveness as well. Remember, he's going from Boise State and he's playing at the highest level now, right? And things could change, right? Like that stance could slow him down just, 1/5 of a second. It might be just 1/4 of a second late to hitting that gap, right? And I'm not saying that's going to 100% happen, but I feel like, you already have offensive linemen, right, that come out of college. And I know it's not really ever talked about, but you'll have an offensive lineman coming out from William and Mary, or a guy coming out from Oklahoma. And you will put these guys at right tackle. And when you run outside zone, for example, there's a specific way these offensive linemen are getting out of their stance, right? Specific footwork, the way you turn your body a little bit, right? I remember one of the Raiders offensive linemen a couple years ago told me that, hey, Tom Cable's the most strict coach he's ever had in terms of the angles, the steps. He wants it done a specific way, right? And they do that with offensive linemen already, right? So guys are changing things up. It's probably just not talked about enough. So Ashton Jeanty changing that stance, it's not like that's a unique thing, right? It happens all the time with different positions, quarterbacks, right? When you're running outside zone or something specific, the footwork might change a little bit. Right. So, just little things, right? Just little things, but, we'll see what ends up happening. I think Ashton Jeanty will still be a phenomenal football player. Let me know what you guys think, man. Raiders OTAs, week 2 is basically wrapping up at this point. And, we got just a couple more practices left for the Raiders. They'll at that point be out for a little while. It's going to be an interesting season, man. I'm telling you guys, the Raiders are so much better than people realize. I know it's a team that's on paper good, but I think they're going to be able to put this out there on the field, right? And that too, they have a good coaching staff, right? Don't overlook the fact that Pete Carroll has proven to be a good coach. Don't overlook the fact that Chip Kelly has had so much success over the course of his career, and even Patrick Graham, right? He was arguably our best coach last year, and the defense was arguably the best unit, and that too, that was with injuries, without a ton of investments relative to the offensive side, at least. Under the Josh McDaniels, Dave Ziegler early on era, right? They put a lot of investments on that offense, not enough on that defense, but, we'll see what ends up happening, man. Let me know what you guys think. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.